everyone, welcome back to Strange Minds 6. I'm your host Ruby, and today we're going to be getting back into Strange Things Are Happening in Creepers, The Gravedigger by Edgar J. Hyde. But before we begin, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It would mean a great deal to me if you did. And without further ado, my dear friends, grab a snack, grab a drink, or sit back and relax. And let's get to it. Chapter 6. Run. It felt like the first time that Andrew had seen the sun since they moved into their new house. He'd spent all morning working on his new book and decided it was time for a break. As he wandered out into his backyard, he glanced at the sky above him. It was clear blue without a cloud in sight. It's about time, he thought. We've had nothing but dark clouds, rain, thunder, and lightning every day for the past week. The ghosts hadn't showed up all day. As Andrew sipped his coffee, he hoped that they were keeping out of trouble, which is difficult for the four friendly ghosts with a lot of spare time on their hands. Andrew reclined in the lounge chair, picked up his newspaper, and relaxed in the warm morning sunshine. Within minutes, he dozed off. Jamie used to joke about his father's ability to sleep at any time of the day, even if he'd just woken up from a good night's sleep. He could fall asleep again within minutes. It's a dad thing, Paula says. If he didn't fall asleep all the time, he wouldn't be a normal dad. Of course, Jamie would argue that he has never been a normal dad. Ah! A scream seemed to pierce Andrew, waking him up in an instant. As he jumped to his feet, still half asleep, he spun around in a desperate attempt to figure out where the scream had come from. The scream was unmistakable. It was Wolfie. It wasn't just the scream that woke him up, but a deep rumbling sound that seemed to be getting louder. As Andrew looked up, he could see what was making the loud rumble. The blue skies had turned gray, and there, racing towards him, was a large black cloud that rolled across the sky, getting closer and closer and louder, and with it came the terrified scream of Wolfie, Count Vanya, Mummy, and Lex Killian. From out of nowhere, Count Vanya flew through the wall, around the graveyard, and across the backyard to Andrew. "He's coming after us!" he screamed. "Who's coming after you?" Andrew asked. Before he could answer, Lex Killian came screaming through the wall, closely followed by Mummy. As they ran across the yard, Lex dropped his head and Mummy fell over his bandages. "He's right behind us!" shouted Lex. "Get in the house!" "What's going on?" asked Andrew again. "There's no time to explain," said Count Vanya. "Just get inside quickly." As they ran toward the back door that led into the kitchen, Wolfie's scream could be heard in the distance. "Run, Wolfie, run!" yelled Lex Killian, as Andrew followed the ghosts inside. "What about Wolfie?" asked Mummy. "How will he get in?" "The same as he always does. He'll run straight through it," answered Andrew, running to the window. "Tell me the truth now," he continued. "What have you done and who is chasing you?" We haven't done anything, shouted Count Vanya. It's Ebenezer Grimm. He's after us. He has a big machine and he's trying to suck us into it, the mummy said. Just then, across the grass, they could see Wolfie. By now, the clouds that raced across the sky were above the house. As Wolfie sprinted for the door, Andrew noticed that something behind the wall was sucking everything toward it. The trees in the yard were bent backwards by the suction of the powerful vacuum, their leaves getting ripped off the branches, and Wolfie was being pulled across the grass toward whatever it was. "Keep running, Wolfie!" screamed Andrew. Keep running! Keep running!" they all shouted. It was as though Wolfie was running and getting nowhere, but slowly he made it to the door. As he did, the door flew open, and from inside the kitchen the rest of them could see Wolfie's paws, followed by his head. Mummy ran to him, grabbed him by the ears, and yanked him inside, forcing both of them to fall into the floor. Andrew turned and looked back out the window. Things were calming down. The trees had returned to their normal shape, and only a few things were being sucked through the air and down behind the wall. Then suddenly there was silence. Andrew could hear his own breath loud in his ears. He turned and looked at the others. By now Wolfie was on his feet and stood with his back to the open door, puffing and panting. Outside, the daylight was slowly leaving, being replaced by darkness. It looked as though someone was dimming the lights. A familiar evil face appeared above the wall. It was Ebenezer Grimm. His long pale face looked even more menacing than it did before. As he climbed to the top of the wall, hoisting a long black machine up beside him, the machine itself looked no more dangerous than a normal vacuum, except it had a few more lights and made a much louder noise. Andrew guessed that this had been the machine Ebenezer Grimm was using to suck everything up. "What happened out there?" asked Andrew, turning to the rest of them. "We were on our way here," replied Count Vanya, "when all of a sudden he appeared before us, waving that machine and shouting how he was going to get us. And you weren't causing trouble?" "No, we were minding our own business." "Do you think he saw you the same way Jamie, Paula, and I can?" "No, he's just the same as other humans," replied Count Vanya. "He can only see us for short periods of time." "I know you're in there," came a shout from the darkness outside. Ebenezer Grimm was sitting on top of the wall holding his machine. "How do you like my little homemade ghost killer?" he asked, patting the machine. "Quite powerful, isn't it?" He laughed. Even his laugh sounded evil, like a witch's deep cackle. Wolfie slammed the door shut. "That man scares me," said Mummy. Andrew looked around the kitchen at the others. They were in agreement with Mummy. It seemed the only person who wasn't frightened of Ebenezer Grimm was Andrew. "What do you want, Mr. Grimm?" shouted Andrew through the window. "It's quite simple," he replied. I would like all of the ghosts to come out of here one by one. Why do you want them to come out? Do you want to talk to them?" "No, Mr. Price," Mr. Krim replied. "I don't want to talk to them. I want to destroy them." Wolfie, Count Vanya, Mummy, and Lex Killian all looked at each other. No one said anything, but they were all thinking the same thing, and they couldn't hide it. They were terrified. "In that case, Mr. Krim, they won't be coming out," yelled Andrew. Mr. Krim did not seem bothered. "That's okay," he replied. "I can wait. I'll wait all night if I have to." Andrew turned to the others and said, "Don't panic. He's bluffing. He'll be gone in a couple of hours." Lex Killian went to speak, but as always, he only managed to spit some salt water onto the floor. "Sorry," he murmured. "I'm not so sure myself. Mr. Krim seems a very determined sort of chap." "Well," replied Andrew, "we'll just have to stay in here until he decides to leave. How long do you think he'll take?" asked Mummy. "As long as it takes," Andrew answered. It was the daylight on Jamie's face that eventually woke him. He turned his sleepy head around the kitchen to see his father asleep on the chair, Paula asleep on the table, and the ghosts asleep anywhere there was a place. Jamie and Paula had arrived home from school the previous day to find themselves in the middle of a standoff between everyone in their house and Ebenezer Krim. Jamie got up from the table and walked to the window just in time to see Ebenezer Krim climb down from the wall and drag his machine away, across the grass behind him and up the hill. As he reached the top of the hill, he turned and stared back at Jamie, although it was only for a few seconds. To Jamie it felt like hours. Even though he was far away, Jamie could still make out his evil grin as he turned and walked over the hill. "No doubt we'll see you again, Mr. Krim," thought Jamie. Chapter 7. The Gravedigger. Ebenezer Krim didn't know he was being watched. As he sat in his own dirty living room, covered in dust and flooded with mice, scrambling across the floor, running into every little nook and cranny in the walls, he was completely unaware that sitting across the table from him was a ghost. It was Count Vanya, or Mummy, or Lex Killian, or Wolfie. This was a ghost that Ebenezer hadn't seen before and couldn't see now. The ghost had long, skinny white fingers, a long, thin body, and a wrinkly, scarred face with black holes where his eyes should be. Ebenezer was polishing his machine, getting ready to destroy some ghosts like he had tried to the previous night, when he heard some scratching noises coming from the other side of the table. He stopped what he was doing immediately and listened. The ghost that he couldn't see got up from the chair across from him and floated across the table toward him, stopping inches from his face. Ebenezer Krim knew that something was there, but he wasn't sure what exactly. Then he heard it. The scratching began again. The ghost was dragging his long fingernails across the table in front of him, marking the wood Ebenezer looked down at the long, thin scratches that were appearing on the table and knew that somewhere in front of him was a ghost. One yank by Ebenezer on the chain, and his sucking machine roared to life. He kicked back his chair, swung the tube toward the ghost in front of him, and flipped the switch. Broken glass plates and cups started flying around the room, along with pictures, ornaments, and anything that wasn't screwed down. It was all sucked into the air and down the long black tube Ebenezer held in his hand. "Time to die, Mr. Ghosty," he screamed at the top of his lungs. As most of his living room began to disappear inside the machine, even after he switched it off, it took a couple minutes for the room to settle. Ebenezer stood in the middle of the room, panting and wheezing as sweat dripped off the end of his pointy nose. His face had a horrible grin on it. This was the first time Ebenezer used the machine on a ghost, and he was sure it had to work. Then he heard the same scratching noise he heard before, but this time it was behind him. Now, Ebenezer Crim was angry. "I'm going to rip you into little pieces and kill you," he screamed as he spun the machine around and once again flipped the switch. Before the machine had a chance to start up, Ebenezer was flung across the room, banging off the wall and falling on the floor. He staggered to his feet. "Where are you?" he yelled. In a flash, the ghost appeared in front of him, frightening him so much that he staggered back and fell down. "Don't even think about using that machine again," the ghost said to him. "Who are you?" asked Ebenezer. "I'm an employee of this graveyard," the ghost replied. "I used to be the Gravedigger." Ebenezer got to his feet again. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "I want you to help me get rid of the prices," the Gravedigger replied. Ebenezer sat down, not taking his eyes off the ghost for a second. Although he hated ghosts, he was beginning to hate Jamie and his family even more. "Go on," said Mr. Crim. Now he was curious to hear what the ghost had to say. "One thing I noticed yesterday," began the Gravedigger, "was how you managed to scare the Price family. I thought nothing could scare that family, certainly not ghosts. Were you there yesterday?" asked Ebenezer. "Because I never saw you." "You never saw me because I never wanted you or the Prices to see me," continued the Gravedigger. "But the Prices can see all ghosts," said Ebenezer. "I know," said the Gravedigger. "They would have been able to see me had I not learned how to hide. You only see me if I want you to see me." "Well, what about the ghosts? Surely they can see you?" "Yes, they can see me. But I can also turn myself into other ghosts, so I can appear as one of the ghost friends, and no one would know the difference." Ebenezer sat for a few seconds thinking about what the Gravedigger just said, and then he asked, "Why do you want to get rid of the Price family?" The grave digger floated around Ebenezer Crim. "The reason I want to get rid of them," he began, "is because ever since they moved into that house, they've made my afterlife miserable. Things used to be peaceful before they came." Ebenezer Crim nodded in agreement. At last he had someone who thought like him on his side. "If you want to get rid of 4 ghosts that live with the Prices, don't waste your time with silly machines. All you have to do is get rid of the Prices. The ghosts will follow them anywhere," said the gravedigger. "But," Ebenezer interrupted, "don't the Prices look for evil spirits like you and try to put them to rest?" "Let me worry about that," replied the gravedigger. "So what do you say? Are you going to help me get rid of them?" Ebenezer looked at him with his evil eyes and said, "What if I don't help you?" The gravedigger moved closer to Ebenezer, right up to his face, and said, "If you don't help me, I'll get rid of you too." For the first time in his life, Ebenezer Crim felt scared. "How are we going to get rid of them?" he asked. "It's quite simple. We'll either scare them out or we'll throw them out," said the gravedigger. As Ebenezer watched the gravedigger laugh at the thought of it, he knew that this was the beginning of very horrible things to come. And with that, my dear friends, we are going to stop at chapter 8, An Appearance. This has been Ruby, signing off.